Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service on this Saturday, November 19th. And if you would like additional weather information on top of what I provide in this broadcast, you can go to weather.gov. That is the National Weather Service's online presence. It'll bring you to a map of the continental U.S. with Alaska and Hawaii to the lower left. If you point and click anywhere on that map, you can get forecasts, watches, warnings, advisories, and much more. And of significant note today, for Saturday afternoon, we continue to see heavy lake effect snows across areas of the Great Lakes, especially western lower Michigan, where well over a foot of snow has fallen since Thursday in areas there, including Grand Rapids. And then further east, just incredible amounts of snow around Buffalo, New York. Orchard Park, as of this Saturday morning, reported 77 inches of snow. That is located, Orchard Park is just southeast of Buffalo in Erie County, and more snow is yet on the way. There's another impulse going to enhance that lake effect snow this Saturday night and early Sunday morning. Further to the west, a large area of gray is due to air stagnation. Ridge of high pressure is just a very stable atmosphere, so the air is not able to turn. That traps smoke and pollutants. So those are issues there in the Pacific Northwest and other parts of the lower 48. But here in Alaska, we have a winter weather advisory that will continue in effect for the Haines Highway until 3 a.m. Not especially heavy snow, but so far as of midday this Saturday, around 3 inches of snow has fallen in the Haines area. An additional inch or so of snow is possible here through this evening and early in the overnight. We're also watching some precipitation associated with the low that's going to back up toward the Kenai Peninsula. A light wintry mix that could include a little bit of light freezing rain, the western Kenai, places like Soldotna, Sterling up toward Kenai, into the Anchorage Bowl Sunday afternoon, early evening. Also, colder air is building out over the western half of the Bering Sea thanks to a strong area of high pressure over eastern Russia. And that colder air will eventually press eastward, bringing breezy, colder conditions along with periods of mainly light snow to the west coast and western interior as we get into early next week. But looking at things here on the far northwest side of the state, Savunga on St. Lawrence Island, cloudy, light fog, 32 degrees. You're going to see a northeast wind picking up here the next couple of days along with periods of mainly light snow. Meanwhile, in the northern panhandle, Skagway reports some light snow and fog, and as I mentioned, Haines has picked up a few inches of snow here through midday Saturday, with additional inch or so on the way here through this evening, with temperatures right around freezing. And there is that winter weather advisory in effect for the Haines Highway until 3 a.m. this Sunday morning. Frontal band is pushing into the panhandle, and areas along the outer coast will see mainly rain. There will be yet another system moving into the panhandle here Sunday night into Monday. So here's the initial low. You can see the curl in the clouds working its way northwestward across the western Gulf, just off the Kenai. And that's what's allowing that frontal band to spread inland there across the panhandle. There is another low that's located south of the Aleutians in the North Pacific, and yet another impulse out there in the North Pacific that's going to lift northward and bring another round of precipitation to the panhandle for Sunday night into the day on Monday. And looking at the weather map, there is that low this Saturday afternoon over the southwestern Gulf with the occluded front lifting northeastward. We have the other low located south of the central Aleutians, and then for now a stalled front out there through the central Bering Sea that will begin to advance eastward with the colder air that'll push into the west side of the state early next week. For late tonight, low pressure situated there just kind of near the entrance of Cook Inlet, and that's going to help spread up some moisture into the western Kenai and up toward the Anchorage Bowl Sunday afternoon and evening. That could include a little bit of freezing rain, not a heavy icing event, but something we'll keep an eye on. And then another push of moisture will lift northward out of the Gulf and move into the Panhandle later Sunday night and Monday. The low that sits there just south of the Alaska Peninsula for Sunday, And on the backside of it, we see winds picking up there out over the northern and western Aleutians, including eastern Russia. And by Monday, we expect that low along the north central Gulf to be pushing in an occluded front across the Panhandle, with yet a stronger low anticipated for Thanksgiving that could impact the Panhandle. So stay tuned to later forecasts. Meanwhile, though, on the west side of the state, we are expecting winds to be increasing there along the eastern Bering, and as that front and colder air pushes eastward, it'll bring in breezier conditions along the west side of the state. Morning lows Sunday morning, we anticipate lows generally above freezing across the Panhandle. Bit below freezing Anchorage northward, and still some sub-zero readings there, 8 below at Northway and 1 below at Fort Yukon. For Sunday afternoon, temperatures upper 40s, maybe even flirting with 50 there, Craig and Sitka in the southeast. Temperatures rising into the mid-30s into the Anchorage Bowl, and generally in the 40s out across the Alaska Peninsula and Aleutians, with upper teens to near 20 along the Arctic coast. Monday morning lows still could dip a little below zero there in the Yukon Flats, and upper Tanana Valley around Northway, Tok. But as we go further south, we see readings generally above freezing in the Panhandle and south of Anchorage through the Kenai Peninsula, and especially out across the Alaska Peninsula. Monday afternoon highs will recover back up into the 40s across much of the Panhandle, nearing 50 there at Klawak, Craig, and Sitka. And temperatures should be back up a bit above freezing Anchorage and even up toward Talkeetna, though staying below freezing in the Copper River Basin at 22 there at Gulkana, Glen Allen. And afternoon highs generally in the lower mid-20s along the west coast, with those westerly winds building. And temperatures are expected to average near to a bit below normal here for Thanksgiving weekend, November 25th through the 29th, centered on south of the Alaska Range in and around the Cook Inlet.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
All right, let's take a look now at aviation weather. If you have a flight planned either Sunday or on Monday, we're going to be watching a couple areas of low pressure. One of them is riding south of the Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula across the North Pacific, gradually heading eastward. And then a secondary low impulse is going to lift out of the North Pacific and impact the northeastern Gulf Coast and Panhandle, especially by the time we get into Monday, bringing some heavier precipitation. Now, as these couple of lows kind of consolidate and get better organized by Tuesday into the western Gulf, that's really going to allow the cold air that's currently pushing southward across the Bering to overtake the west and northwest sides of the state. So we'll see an increase in areas of snow developing too along areas of the western mainland and coast. So looking at IFR conditions Sunday morning, widespread there from the Bering Strait down through the Bering Sea, especially eastern Aleutians, south side of the Alaska Peninsula, up into along the Gulf and Panhandle. A lot of VFR conditions yet along the Yukon Valley and north side of the Alaska Range by Sunday afternoon. MVFR conditions there, north slope and south side of the Alaska Range, with IFR conditions from St. Lawrence Island down through St. Matthew and St. Paul. We also see IFR conditions along the northern Gulf Coast into the Panhandle and the intercoastal mountains there of the southeast. For Monday morning, widespread IFR conditions along the Gulf Coast, especially the coastal mountains, and then going into the Panhandle as the next surge of moisture lifts up there through the eastern portion of the Gulf. And then areas of IFR back across the Alaska Range, southwest interior, back to St. Lawrence down through Nunavik Island and St. Paul, as well as the eastern Aleutians. And for Monday afternoon, as the areas of snow and colder air overtake the west side of the state, we'll see IFR conditions with lower ceilings and visibilities in those areas of lower cloud cover, and predominantly light snow that could even be mixed with a little bit of freezing drizzle in some areas as that colder air presses slowly eastward. Now, Anaktuvik Pass on Sunday will be MVFR, as will Adigan Pass there across the Brooks Range. And further south and west, Lake Clark and Merrill will see VFR conditions give way to MVFR conditions as we go through the shorter daylight hours of Sunday. Rainy Pass, generally MVFR conditions will prevail, and we expect that for Windy Pass too. And then Isabel Pass, look for MVFR conditions on Sunday with a pocket of IFR conditions sitting there south of the south entrance. And Metastapass should see MVFR conditions try to give way to a period of VFR conditions during the day on Sunday. Further south and west, Tenedo Pass starts out with IFR giving way to MVFR conditions, and Portage Pass, basically it's a split. The eastern half of the pass will be IFR extending out into Prince William Sound, and MVFR there, western half out through the west entrance. Chilkoot and White in the far northern panhandle, we expect those two passes to remain IFR on Sunday. Freezing levels Sunday morning, the freezing line runs along the southwestern coast and then up along Cook Inlet, the northern northeastern Gulf Coast to the inner Channel coastal mountains there of the southeast. Freezing levels do bump up a bit to 4,000 feet there across the southwest interior on the west side of the Alaska Range, and bump up to 4 to near 6,000 feet there over the southern portion of the Panhandle. Greatest threat for icing on Sunday will be along areas of the Gulf Coast, eastern Kenai, Prince William Sound toward Yakutat above 6,000 feet. And then also some areas there at the tip of the Alaska Peninsula and back out over the central Bering, extending north from the central Aleutians above 6,000 feet. Upper level jet stream winds at 30,000 feet. There is a jet core just over 100 knots right along the Gulf North Pacific interface. And also some winds out over eastern Russia from the southwest of 60 to 80 knots. At 9,000 feet or 700 millibars, we do see some stronger winds aloft coming into the mainland there over, say, the Copper River Basin, upwards of 50 knots from the south-southwest, with low center circulation back toward the eastern Aleutians around Dutch Harbor, backside north flow over the western Aleutians to 45 knots, and then 3,000 feet. We see the low-pressure circulation there out over the eastern Aleutians. Some winds off of the Panhandle from the south-southwest, upwards of 40 to 50 knots, and on the backside, 45 to 60 knots in the western Aleutians. Greatest threat for turbulence, isolated severe turbulence in through the western half of the Aleutians, surface to 4,000 feet, and then a broad area of considerable moderate turbulence along the Gulf Coast, surface to 4,000 feet.
You guys got everything tied down back there? Yeah. Yep. We're going through the lee of St. Elias, so there might be some turbulence.
Fasten seatbelt sign on.
Well, who am I to tell you what to do?
There are tens of thousands of glaciers in Alaska. Some stunning cliffhangers, others wide glaciers that come down to meet the ocean tides. Some, like this one we flew over in August, are easily visible from low Earth orbit and are mesmerizing from 1,000 feet above, and have trees growing on top of their soil-laden boundaries. Those glaciers, although they represent only a fraction of the world's ice, are contributing much more than their share to sea level rise. Chris Larson and his colleagues have repeatedly measured 220 of them in a small single-engine otter, measuring their height with lasers and their depth with radar, and watching them change from season to season and year to year. But Alaskan glaciers are also different. We're only just figuring out how they all behave. Data from flights like these, part of NASA's Operation Icebridge, can help fill the gaps. Chris and radar specialist Martine Trufer are both from the University of Alaska Fairbanks and both seasoned Alaskan pilots. But they rely on their good friend and legendary bush pilot Paul Kloss and his 35,000 hours in the cockpit to fly the incredibly demanding flight lines the mission requires.
And does it help you guys being pilots too?
I would like to think so, but watching Paul fly and seeing what he does, it's kind of like trying to learn quantum mechanics in kindergarten.
You know, I can fly my airplane around, but just seeing what Paul does in this extremely challenging environment in the mountains while trying to follow a specific flight line at a specific altitude above ground, negotiating winds, topography, maybe occasional low-level clouds that you have to get around, and just managing all that is just several levels above what I could do as a pilot.
Well, I think the first time I came here to this park, I was probably 4 years old with my father. I've been blessed to be able to fly in lots of places in the world, all over the place, actually, almost every continent. I guess I'm always looking for some place that might be better than this, but I haven't found it.
Paul's plane is about 60 years old and is the first single-engine otter ever retrofitted with a 1,000 horsepower engine, which makes takeoffs feel effortless and gives Paul the ability to negotiate wild terrain, which he certainly did during the first 2 incredible science flights of this campaign. And with sunny skies and relatively calm air, we covered 3 vastly different pieces of ice. While Paul fueled up the plane, Chris gave us a preview of the day's science and scenery.
So it has one of the greatest coastal reliefs anywhere in the world. So it's between the ocean and the summit of Mount St. Elias, which is 18,008 feet high. It's less than 10 miles. There's a stupendous amount of mountain right off the ocean. It's hard to beat it anywhere in the world. It might be the prettiest for me. It's absolutely stunning. From here in McCarthy, we'll cross one of the bigger precipitation gradients in Alaska too. Here it's about 10 inches of precipitation a year, and we'll go over to an area where it's on the order of 200 inches per year. So it's from one of the driest parts of Alaska to one of the wettest parts of Alaska in about 45 minutes flight time.
Oh, that's pretty good.
That's awesome. You want to do Tyndall next?
Sure, where you want?
If the winds are calm now, might as well grab it.
First, we came to the rugged landscape of Icy Bay, which not that long ago wasn't a bay at all. It was filled with ice. Tidewater glaciers in this region can make dramatic advances and retreats as they feed on high rates of snowfall and then retreat as they're melted by warm ocean waters. Like the Tyndall Glacier seen here, most of these glaciers have retreated dramatically over the last 100 years. But nearby Yahtzee Glacier, after years of retreat, is currently the most rapidly advancing glacier in Alaska. Overall, though, the Icebridge Alaska surveys, from the Denali region in the north to the Juneau ice field in the southeast, have documented pretty substantial thinning of glacial ice. Areas seen here in orange and red show between about 10 and 15 feet of thinning per year.
12:30.
It's a nice waterfall up there from the hanging ice.
We very first started profiling this, Paul, this gravel fan and the one in the valley next to it didn't exist.
I was going to say,
this was
look
deep.
at all the good landing spots here.
Yeah,
There's no place to land here before.
no, it was deep water.
After covering several of Icy Bay's glaciers, given that it was time for lunch, just like that, we landed in this unforgettable spot. Flying eastward, leaving Icy Bay behind, we came to the mighty Malaspina, one of the Earth's great examples of a Piedmont glacier that spills out like pancake batter onto a broad plain as it approaches the sea. It surges at uneven intervals, creating dramatic patterns on its surface as it distorts the moraines of rock and soil borne along by the glacier. The Malaspina is less dynamic than the Yahtzee and is only melting at about the average rate for Alaska, but that could change quickly.
It has the potential for being one of the bigger geographic evolutions in Alaska. Certainly My son will be able to witness some big geography changes there. There's potential for it being connected with the ocean through some narrow lagoons, estuaries, which would take a little bit of coastal erosion, but it's not too hard to imagine that where the Malaspina Glacier is now could become a large bay.
The data that Martine's radar provides could reveal how vulnerable the Malaspina is to melting by the nearby ocean. Here we see the radar returns from the surface of the glacier, and here is something that Chris's lasers can't see, the rocky bed of the glacier, giving us both clues as to what's happening under the ice, as well as a measurement of its thickness. Finally, we came to the Yakutat ice field, 300 square miles of absolutely doomed ice perched high in the mountains. Researchers even debate how this ice field came to be at all, since in its current configuration, it's hard to imagine how it could capture enough snow to form glacial ice. And so, even if the Arctic weren't warming faster than the rest of the planet, this area would be likely to melt within a century or two. But with many other glaciers, it's easier to see the connection between a warming planet and ice loss. Thanks to data from IceBridge and other surveys, we now have a good estimate of the current rate of loss from Alaskan glaciers, 75 gigatons a year. While airborne observations over Alaskan glaciers have provided a rich record of change in the area, those efforts are now augmented by NASA's newest ice measuring tool, ICESat-2. With 6 laser beams of its own, and orbiting the Earth every 90 minutes, the satellite will carry on the record of Alaskan change. For their part, Chris and his team will continue to do their surveys for at least the next 2 years, helping to validate the ICESat-2 data and make further detailed observations over the stunning glaciers of Alaska.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back, and looking at the sea ice edge, what goes up must come down. Last week it was strong south-southwest flow along the west and northwest coast. Now the winds are reversing. They're going to go around to the northeast and north, bringing in some colder air that's going to be building over the western half of the Bering and then spreading eastward early in the week ahead. So right now we have a fair amount of ice there up along the Arctic coast, Beaufort Sea, Utqiagvik to Kaptovik. Extending down along the northwest coast, the Chukchi Sea coast there. The ice was disturbed with that milder air and wind push last week, as well as down into Norton Sound. We do anticipate some rather brisk winds to develop first on the north side of St. Lawrence Island as we go into Monday. We'll highlight this coming up. You'll be able to see that trend developing in the marine maps coming up here shortly. For the southeast panhandle, winds on Sunday will be out of the southeast-south inner channels, 15 to 20 knots, waves 3 to 4 feet, Petersburg north through Lynn Canal, 7 feet down toward Dixon Entrance, and south winds generally 20 to 25 knots, with the outer coast waves running 8 to 10, 8 to 11 feet. Monday, another surge, another low comes up. This will have stronger winds. We expect gale force winds there on the outer coast of south-southeast, upwards of 45 knots, with waves 16 to say 18, 19 feet. Inner channels, the winds will really pick up there. Petersburg southward 35 to 40 knots, southeasterly gales with gusts upwards of 50 knots around Petersburg. And then on the areas of the northwest Gulf, off the Kenai, south of Cordova, south winds 20-25 knots. Southeast winds within Prince William Sound to 25 knots, waves 5 feet. And with the low circulation there sitting off the Kenai, we expect northeast winds down the length of Cook Inlet at 20 knots, with waves running 5 to 7 feet. For Monday, winds will remain easterly 20 knots or so in Prince William Sound with 3-foot waves. Off the Kenai coast, south-southwest winds 15 to 25 knots south of Cordova, and Coming out of Cook Inlet, winds will be out of the northeast to north at 10 to 20 knots with waves generally 3 to 5 feet through the lower half of Cook Inlet. Variable winds for Sunday, Shelikof Strait there near Kodiak Island, 10 knots, waves 5 feet. As we go down the length of the Alaska Peninsula, North Pacific side, southeast 20 knots, waves 8 to 11 feet, and east winds 25 knots, waves 4 to 5 feet on the Bering side. For Monday, winds are generally northerly there in Shelikof Strait, 15 knots. Kind of a mixed bag, winds northwesterly off of Sandpoint to 20 knots, waves 10 feet, and from Bristol Bay down through north of Cold Bay, winds will be northeast to north at 20 knots, waves 3 to 5 feet. Now here come those stronger winds from the western half of the Bering. Look at west of Atka and Adak, 40 to 45 knot northwest to northerly gales. That's really going to kick up waves in excess of 20 feet, northwest and west of Adak. And then for Monday, those winds continue to slowly press eastward through the central into the early eastern Aleutians, 35 to 40 knot northwest to north gales, waves building upwards 15 to 19 feet on the North Pacific side and 20 to say 25 feet there on the Bering side. And across the southwest coast, northeast winds 20 knots there, Norton Sound, 4-foot waves off of the Yukon Delta. West of Nunavik Island, winds will pick up upwards of 15 to 20 knots, so they could be up to 30 knots south of St. Lawrence Island, where waves could run 10 feet. But notice those stronger winds now coming closer to shore by Monday. North-northwest winds 35 to 40 knot gales south of St. Lawrence down through St. Paul and St. George, with waves building 14 to 18 feet. Along the Arctic coast Sunday, look for easterly winds 10 knots. They turn northerly and increase to 30 knots through the lower Chukchi Sea and Bering Strait. Waves building 5 to 7 feet lower Chukchi Sea, upwards to 10 feet on the north side of St. Lawrence. And then Monday, we can really see that along the Arctic coast, east-northeast winds 20 knots with ice in place. But as we go through the lower Chukchi Sea, Bering Strait, north side of St. Lawrence, 40-knot northerly gales with waves building upwards of 11 to 14 feet. So keep that in mind. We are going to see those winds increasing along the northwest and western coast, especially there off of the areas through the Bering Strait as we go into early next week. Thank you for watching.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.